Well, hello. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited for this. If you've heard anything of my kind of story with Star Wars, I've read a lot about the EU, but I haven't read much of it myself. And, I kind of got tired of watching videos about the EU, about just kind of reading like summaries or reading bullet points and things like that. And I figured, why not just dive in and actually read it for myself? And just so you know, this right here was the very first EU book I read in its entirety, The Heart of the Jedi. What a weird one to start with, just because it was never actually published. But I really enjoyed this. Like, I just could not put it down. And so from there, what I went into is I went into Star Wars, A New Hope novelization. And I'm excited to talk about it. Just say, what's up, Jacob? What's up, Blue? Good to see you guys here. Essentially, what I'm going to do with this stream is I want to talk through kind of my general thoughts on the novelization. I also want to go through, there's a lot that is different in this book than what's in the actual movie. It was very interesting, and I'll talk about why that is and why I actually really enjoyed this. And very possibly there may be a guest. He is another dad who loves the EU, but he's putting his kids down to bed right now. So maybe there will be a guest, maybe not. But essentially, just so you guys know, with all of these streams, essentially what I'm looking at doing is answering any questions you guys have about the book, just telling you kind of my general thoughts and opinions and giving you a summary of everything, a lot of the cool little details, and also bringing in people who love the book as well, just so we can keep talking about it. Because at the end of the day, this is what I'm finding. I get excited about Star Wars when I read stuff that I like, when I watch things that I like. And you know what? Stuff like this, even though I've seen A New Hope so many times, this made me like and appreciate A New Hope that much more. I'm so excited to talk about this. And Blue, man, I know, Blue, it is super late where you are. And so, man, I'm glad you're going to catch this tomorrow, man. You have a heat wave? Oh, I feel you. I feel you, man. I feel you. And you have a question. I feel like anytime somebody says they have a question, I just feel like I'm getting set up for some TikTok prank. So we'll see. Like, I have a feeling if I read this, I'm going to get memed. So, all right. Charlie says, this is perfect listening to this as I'm training. Keep the wisdom coming. All right, my man. Dude, so cool. So let's get going. Star Wars. Originally, this was just called like Star Wars: The Adventures of Luke Skywalker. It's credited to George Lucas, but George Lucas didn't actually write this. It was ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster. And you know what? He knows how to write Star Wars. That's what's up. Oh, hey, girl. Hey, what's up? Your question was my favorite version of Obi-Wan. I'm going to say the prequel version. I guess that's my favorite. Maybe in particular, episode 3. I think, yeah, it's my favorite version of Obi-Wan. Yep. Okay. So what I really like about this novelization is, it's changed a little bit. I have the special edition. The general, this is like the 56th printing of the book. There's so many. The original has the Ralph McQuarrie concept art as the cover for Darth Vader, and it is super cool. And, there is this interesting prologue to the book. And essentially what it is talking about is the prequels. Like, there is a very loose plan for the prequels, but what's interesting in this, they call Palpatine the Emperor, but in other versions of the book, they actually call him the Emperor. Or no, I'm sorry, they call him the Emperor in mine, but they call him the President in other early iterations and early printings. And so that, that's really interesting that they would call him President Palpatine. And what's different about the prequel edition in here is that Palpatine was used as more of like a puppet in the prologue, So basically, it says that he rose to power, and then basically it's these yes men and bootlickers around him who essentially used him just for their own gain. And I found that very fascinating because obviously the Palpatine and Sidious we know is different. He's more of a mastermind, and so it was quite interesting to read that the original direction for the Empire and Palpatine in particular was very different than what we got. But you know what? Nonetheless, I like it. Interact some chat here. Yes, sir. Mine's Old Ben, episode 4. And good night, everybody. May the force be with y'all. Good night, Blue. Have a good night, man. Okay, I want to read this just because I thought I was getting pranked. Actually, Obi-Wan makes a duck reference, and Luke asks, what's a duck, somewhere in the novelization. Oh, yes. Yes, he does. I don't remember exactly where. It's been decades since I've read it. Yes, that's so funny. Yeah, there was the language in the book is very interesting because it definitely dates itself a little bit in some areas. There is a duck reference, and it's it's pretty funny. What's up, Real Talk? Just talking about Star Wars book. The second Star Wars book I've actually read in completion. That's what's up, man. So here's what's really cool about this book. First off, it is brutal. So brutal. Like, I think if this were completely seen in film, it would be rated R. I really do. And if you didn't know, this was actually written in 1976. So it was actually before the movie came out. And so this was turned into a novel based off of the original script in 1976. And so there's a lot in here that actually doesn't make it to Star Wars. It doesn't make it to A New Hope. And it's quite interesting. Like, for instance, in some of the very early scenes, you know, with Vader and the rebels, some stormtroopers actually get shot in the head, and it describes them as having a melted mass of bone and metal where their head once was. Like, that's like, oh man, like, that is not what you see in the movies. In the movies, you almost are made to feel that the stormtrooper suits are plastic, and that basically when they're getting shot, it just can't withstand the energy and the firepower of the blasters and the bolts. And, you know, I really thought that was interesting, just how brutal this book really was. And there's quite a bit of stuff in a little bit that we'll get to, some lightsaber stuff in particular, that shows just how brutal the Star Wars universe was meant to be. But like I said, I think if this, based off of all of the fights that take place, if this were turned into a movie, how would I word that? If this were fully translated into film, it would definitely be R, just because there's some pretty explicit and gory scenes. It's not over the top, but it's definitely making you feel the weight of what's going on. One thing that's actually really cool as well is when Darth Vader and Leia meet. Leia spits in his face. Like, are you kidding me? Just right in his face, spits, and Darth Vader actually wipes it off so he can see. And I thought that was very fascinating because you see in the movie that she stands up to Darth Vader and that she has no problem, like, getting right up in his face and just basically lying to him. And obviously with Rogue One, you know, we've kind of seen that. It's like he knows exactly what's going on. But instead, here with Leia spitting in the face of Vader, I think that's like so fitting for her character, just the disrespect she shows. And I'm here for it. Real Talk says, love your stream topics. Thanks, man. I was like, you know what? If no one pops onto this because no one's interested, I'm just gonna chop it up and make some videos. But I'm glad people are interested. Aiden, what's up? How's it going, man? Okay. Another thing I found really interesting. I'm gonna be saying that a lot because we've all seen A New Hope. We're all here because of Star Wars. We're all here because of Episode 4. So I was wondering what the novelizations would actually be like, but a guy who talks about the EU a lot, and they're over at the expandeduniverse.com Chris Nelson said that the novelizations are some of the best content out there in the EU. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to start from the beginning, because I think this right here is the first piece of the EU. If I understand it correctly, this is like the first piece of the EU. So I figured, why not start there and branch out? And there's a lot more detail about things that I've always wondered about. And in particular, one thing is C-3PO was actually programmed to act very human, so he would blend in to the people around him. And there's things like his ears, if you would say that, are omnidirectional, so he can hear everything going around him. He doesn't have to move. But part of his programming is that he would actually turn his head to listen, as if like wherever the sound source was coming from, he would actually turn his head. And there's other things that talks about how he had basically these like olfactory senses, these mechanical parts where he would react to smell, and he would do certain things with his body so that it would seem like he was just one of the crew and he was, just hanging out with the boys, so to speak. But I found that very fascinating because when we watch the movie, we see that C-3PO is very human-like, and that he is, I don't know, that he's just different. And the question always is, like, is their personality programmed, or is it something that develops, almost like a singularity? Can they grow in their personality, and can it become jaded? And I found it very interesting that it was programmed into him. If you've watched the deleted scenes for A New Hope, they're all in the book. It's super cool. Like if you've watched them, they feel like they're a little out of place, and it's just like, well, that's cool, but does it really fit in context of the movie? Just because they're not fully done, they were deleted scene. They didn't make it off the cutting room floor, but in particular, in this book, you find this scene where it's Luke, working on the moisture evaporators, and basically he sees these flashes in the sky, and he goes basically to the local hangout, and that's where like Biggs is, and that's where like all of his friends are, and all of this stuff. There's this interaction, and he kind of has like the hots for one of the girls there, and you just see him in his element, and then Biggs pulls him aside and talks to him like a big brother, and talks to him about the rebellion and all of this, and it just kind of helps the motivation of Luke as a character moving forward, and I found that really interesting. You also find out, I didn't know this, apparently Luke lives on the outskirts of a town called Anchorhead on Tatooine. Like, that was really cool to find out. I always just thought Tatooine was just kind of just a desert planet. Like, there was like little colonies, but not cities. And we also find out that Luke is part of him planning to stay on for like one more season with his Uncle Owen. It wasn't just like, there's kind of two sides to it. Yes, Uncle Owen wanted him to stay back so that he could help with the crops and so that he could help with the harvest. But he also wanted him to stay back because they just got to the point with with their moisture farm to where they could basically not just make ends meet, they could start making a profit. And I guess the Tusken Raiders were known to come and destroy them, and Jawas would come and scrap things out. And so part of Luke's job was basically to fire at Tusken Raiders and to scare them off. And Uncle Owen could only do so much. So I found that interesting because that helped give weight to the fact that, yes, not only does Uncle Owen need help, and he knows, like, if you go off, you're going to end up going down the path of your father. But then also there was an element that was there that we don't actually see in the movies, and it makes sense. It makes Tatooine feel like a very volatile and hostile place. And Jabba is a furry creature, if I remember correctly. Maybe. At least from what I read in this, I didn't have Jabba in it. So maybe it's mixing it with another treatment or something, but that's interesting. Jabba, a furry creature. There are things that are like that. We're definitely, like some of the characters we know and some of the descriptions don't exactly match up. Like one thing they described Chewbacca's hand, his fist, like the size of a pan. So I'm just thinking like, oh my gosh, they just describe him as being massive. And like that would be so terrifying. And there's a really cool thing about Greedo we're going to get to. I love it. One thing that was interesting too is apparently there's like weathermen on Tatooine, because they talk about the scientists and the meteorologists are doing all this studying and things like this on like the weather patterns and all that. I just found it interesting. Like, what would the weatherman on Tatooine, like, what would they study? I mean, there's sandstorms and it's dry. That's pretty much it. But there's a lot of world building and there's a lot of detail in there that helps you really see that there's people trying to survive there, and there's actually people kind of like trying to figure out how things work on the planet and how can they live. And obviously, I don't want to see the weatherman on Tatooine in the actual movie, but that was fairly interesting. One thing that is different when we start transitioning back to Vader and the Empire and all of this, if you guys remember, all of you should remember it, the scene where Vader is basically at the, not the round table, basically the round table with all the Imperial officers and all of that. Vader, kind of as a show of how he can use the Force, actually uses the Force to grab a cup of water off the table, like pulls it up and catches it. That was just I don't know, a strange detail. Like, I got my water here and I'm about to take a drink, and I'm just thinking, like, out of all the things that Vader could do to show his power in that moment, he he pulls a glass of water to himself. Like, all right. I wish I had the Force to pull my water. That's for sure. There in this book too, there's a lot of back and forth really quickly, even more so than the movie, like in terms of you will be following Vader around, and then you'll be following Luke, and then you'll be back to Vader and Leia, and you'll be then with Tarkin, and then you'll be with Han, and so there's a lot of like shifting around, even more so than the movie, and so that it's a little different, because it's not like, okay, we have a chapter solely dedicated to this scene. There are multiple scenes in the chapter, and so it is nice because it does make it a little quicker to read, but it also makes it a little hard to like break in the middle of the chapter. Like if you're like me, like sometimes I have a hard time like comprehending what I'm reading, so sometimes I just need to put a pause in it. But there's so much going on that's interconnected in this novelization that you have to like slow it down just a little bit. But with that said, we right after this whole scene with Vader, and the reason I'm being a little brief with some of this is you've all seen A New Hope, so I'm kind of giving you some things that are very different. But then we cut back to the scene with Uncle Owen and the Jawas and Luke and all of this. And what's really weird in this is, okay, so if I'm remembering correctly, in the movie, the Jawas understand Basic, and in the book, Uncle Owen speaks Jawa'ese to them. And so that was really weird, like to picture Uncle Owen like speaking Jawa'ese to the Jawas, like that would be super strange, to be honest. And then once basically, there's R2 and C-3PO and all this, and you find out that C-3PO actually has a middle name. I didn't know this. C-3PO's middle name is V-E-E, CV-3PO. And his middle name stands for versatility. Who knew? Man, I always got a little weirded out when I read like SEE-3PO, that kind of spelling. But yeah, CV-3PO was his middle name. And that was just another little interesting like tidbit of information there. And there's also this whole thing that's very different in the book than the movie, where Ben Kenobi, he's actually coming around more and more to the Lars homestead. And when he comes around, he's always coming around to trade, and he's being shooed off. And it does change. I mean, if you're thinking about the movie in context of the book, it does change things a little bit because Luke is like, I've heard of this guy. You know, is Obi-Wan Kenobi that old crazy guy out there that I've heard about? Where in the book, Obi-Wan actually comes around and interacts with Luke. And I think that actually changes a lot in the story and in the narrative. And when it comes to that scene where Luke actually meets Ben, but right before that, you know, there's this whole run-in with the Tusken Raiders when he's going to look for R2 and all of this. Luke actually faints instead of like what plays out in the movies, like being hit. Like he actually like faints and passes out, and it's just like, I don't know. Like that was one detail I didn't like too much, just because it felt weird that Luke would like pass out from fear. You know, it just kind of like, I mean, it made the Tusken Raiders more intimidating, I suppose. But yeah, it was fairly interesting that Luke would pass out like that. One of my favorite parts of this book, and maybe this is a strange detail, but one of my favorite parts of this book actually has to deal with 3PO. And whenever, you know, C-3PO gets like busted up, I've always wondered, like, how is it so easy to put him together? Because in the movies, we even see like all the wires and all the stuff coming out of his arm. And like, he can't be like as simple as just like click and put him back. And right after the run-in with the Tusken Raiders, you know, he's in pieces and Luke is putting him back together. And on a certain page, it's actually going into detail for how that works. And so in the novelization, basically what it says is that if 3PO's arm breaks at a point that's not a joint, basically what ends up happening is there's this protective seal where it'll close, and it protects all of the wiring and all of the internals from being severed. And basically, it's so that there's this armament, I guess, where it can reseal itself, and then these internal healing mechanisms kick in, and it actually starts like re-knitting all of his nerves. And I just found that like so cool and so fascinating because it's such a strange detail to put in the book. But for me, it helps make so much more sense for why, like in Empire Strikes Back and stuff, you know, we can see like Chewie putting 3PO back together. Like it's like, oh, that makes so much sense with why that works, because the technology is so advanced, like everything just comes together. Like I love that. T-Money, what's up, man? How's it going? Good to see you. Always a pleasure to have you here, dude. Let's see this. But I think in the movie, it is implicit that Luke has met Ben several times too. He even says, "Boy, am I glad to see you," after being saved. Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah. I would be interested to do even a comparison with how they treat the Luke and Ben relationship in the book and in the movie. Like really analyze it and look at that, because I kind of got the feeling that he had never met Ben from the movie. But I'm gonna take your word for that, man. You know, because it's in the book for sure, and that's interesting. But even kind of running off of that, one thing that happens is when Luke is at Obi-Wan's house and they're talking about things. Luke knew about the Clone Wars in the book, and he already knew about lightsabers, and so I personally like the direction of the movie a little more, because I like that mystery and him finding things out. But it also makes sense that he knows about the Clone Wars and that he's heard of lightsabers. But when the Force is being described, like that, there's a little bit of a different direction that takes place that, I was kind of like 50-50 on, to be honest. So basically, when the Force is being described, it's more of, how would I put this? It's almost like a like a divine will manifested, if that makes sense. So it's almost like everything's predestined, but it's also an energy that can control the things, like it can control the things around you, and you can actually like you can actually affect it if you are in tune with the Force, and Jedi's and Sith in particular can affect it. So there's a lot of mystery around the Force, but it almost felt like this. There's like two things happening at the same time. There's like this energy that keeps everything together and can be manipulated to control things, but there's also a divine will aspect, kind of like an as the Force wills it. And that for me was like, I like that concept, because they're even in the scene where Han Solo is basically saying like, "Oh, I don't believe in any of that hokey Force stuff," and Obi-Wan just kind of like chuckles and smiles a little bit and is like, "Yeah, okay, like he understands like the Force has willed you here." There's that kind of a predisposition that you feel, but then at the same time, I like the idea of they're making their own choices and their own destiny in life, and their Force abilities are a way to change the environment around them. So yeah, that was pretty cool. Another thing that they go into detail quite a bit more in the book is about that like torture globe that they use on Princess Leia, that dark metal globe that comes in. Basically, it's described as being this like barbaric torture device, and its whole point was to inflict like an incredible amount of pain on the person that they want to like extract information from, or that they just want to torture. And basically it on this globe, it has like all these different things for every single species almost. So like whatever affects your species uniquely, they have something to torture you with this. And it really helps build the dark side of the Empire, and just show you just the lengths that they're willing to go to get information and to really suppress those who resist them or rebel against them. And it's even described in the book that basically the sounds that people would make when they were having this device put against them were so bad that even the stormtrooper guards would venture far away from the cell so they wouldn't hear the sounds that was taking place in their cell. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, this book is really brutal, because like, to think about that scene with Princess Leia and her being tortured, like in the book, it literally says like Vader and Tarkin are like there in the room, and everybody else like goes as far away as possible so they don't hear the screams and the gurgles and like all this crazy stuff, and it just makes your skin crawl, and you're like, ooh, man. Like, I think the book does a slightly better job at painting this clear divide between good and evil, and I like it. I'm here for it. Obviously, we got Vader up on our wall, so we're here for it. And like I said earlier, in the novelization, there's a ton of cuts back and forth between scenes, even more so than the movie. When it comes down to Luke and Obi going into the cantina, there is another really brutal scene. Basically, what happens in this scene is, Obi-Wan like cuts off the guy's arm, like we know. But then he also straight up cuts someone in half, just like whoosh, just right down the middle. And it says that basically, like he was cauterized, and like literally, and I know this sounds gruesome, but it's in the book. Basically, these two halves of a person, like these two halves of meat, as they describe it, just kind of like fold and fall like this, and everybody watches this happen. And to me, that just made Obi-Wan that much more BA, but then lightsabers more terrifying, and the cantina more intense, and then people just go back to their business. Like, straight up, a dude just got halved right there, and everybody just like, all right, leave those two alone, What's up, Darth Revan? Good to see you, man. Average, what's up? Good to have you here, dude. Um, you know, and this is maybe another random little tiny piece of trivia, out of this book, but they don't say parsecs in the book. They say standard time parts, and I'm really interested, in particular, with why George Lucas changed so many of these little details, because I've heard him speak like on some behind the scenes things, that basically parsecs were, it wasn't like a time unit for him. A parsec was a distance. And so it was like this measurement of distance. So when it's like, oh, well, I made the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. Basically, it was like, how could you do that? Because of the way you would have to plot a hyperspeed course, it would be like it wouldn't make sense. It just wouldn't. And so in the book, they call it like standard time parts, under this assumption that it's like it took me X amount of hours or minutes or what have you to get somewhere. And so those little details, I'm interested in, because we've seen George over the years change small details throughout the film because it didn't capture what was in his mind. And so that's something, I don't know if there is an explicit explanation for that, but that's something I would love to know more about. I mentioned this earlier. I'm so excited about this part. This part was crazy. So in the cantina, after Obi-Wan and Luke meet up with Han and Chewie, and there's this whole back and forth about using the Falcon, and they want to go to Alderaan and all this stuff. Greedo comes right away, and Greedo in the book actually has like a translator. So he's not speaking his language and Han understands him. He actually has this translator that translates it into basic. But anyway, he's just accosting Han, and he's like, hey, yesterday you told me you'll have the money for me. A week ago, you told me this. A month ago, you told me this, right? So there's this like, hey man, I've been coming around. Jabba wants his money, and if you can't deliver, he's just gonna want you dead, and so I'm here to kill you. Basically, that's what's going on, like what we know. And there's this little exchange, and Han shoots first because Han has always shot first. It's in the book. But in the book, it says that Greedo turns into like a splattered pile of green goo. And it's like, dang. Like, so in the movie, he's shot in the chest and he falls down on the table. But in the book, he turns into a pile of goo. And I'm like, that is ruthless and so brutal. And Han, basically what he does, he goes and drops some change at the bar and is like, hey, sorry for the mess. But I like that because you see that like there's some serious people coming at Han, and Han is like out for himself. And even by the end of the book, it really helps set up his character development. And I liked seeing him like that. I understand George didn't want to make Han out to be this like really intense aggressor, but I think this works really well. Let's see this. I think Alan Dean Foster thought parsec as written in the screenplay was just plain wrong, and tried to make sense of it by changing it to standard time unit or whatever. That makes sense, man. That really does. Because I guess if you read parsec, it would be, because there's a lot of stuff. So it's like if you read about parsec or all these like random like womp rats and stuff, you're like, what the heck is that? And there's world building, but maybe they're trying to make it feel a little more cohesive. Maybe that would work a little better. Timeline, what's up? Good to see you, man. You said, hey man, I need a copy of the actual first print book version. Yes. They're not going to part with it, but I think the guys from EBN, Coach from EBN, I think he has one of those. Like, that's super cool. I have I would love to have the first edition. I have like the 56th edition, So I'm way out there. You asked me, have you read Splinter of the Mind's Eye? I'm curious what your thoughts are. I have not, but I own it. So basically, I've read a lot about the EU and I've watched a lot about the EU. And so this whole thing is kind of documenting my journey into the EU. I've read 2 books in the EU so far for myself. I know generally what happens in a lot, but I've read these 2 myself. And so part of this is just doing it. It's on my list. So time will come where I will talk about it, my man. So when it comes down to after that whole scene, another pretty fascinating thing is, when the Millennium Falcon is leaving, and they go to Alderaan and all of this. When they're approaching the Death Star, they actually recognize the Millennium Falcon. They're like, "Oh, hey, this is that ship that was seen leaving Mos Eisley." And so there's this whole conversation about, oh, the people we want are on the ship, because they make these connections with the droids, and maybe the droids went down, we were looking for them, we can't find them. Maybe they connected with these people, and all this stuff keeps happening. It's like that's an interesting detail that was a little different. And basically, what happens is they when they land, people go in and they check the logs, and they find out in the logs it says that they abandoned ship after they left Mos Eisley. So basically, they took off of the planet and they ejected all the escape pods, and the Imperial troops are reading this report. And a cool little detail, this Imperial trooper is called to check the ship with a scanner, and his call sign is THX 1138. So I thought that was cool that, George and Alan Dean Foster had, made sure that there was a reference to really one of the projects that started it all. I thought that was a cool little nod to George Lucas, if you will. But basically what ends up happening, I'm skipping a lot of the narrative itself, but that's okay. We all know the story. To be honest, this doesn't add a tremendous amount of depth to the narrative, but it does add a lot of cool little details, and there are additional scenes that are different that I really enjoyed. It's great. Timeline, see you later, man. Talk to you later. You guys enjoy the stream. Have a great night, Timeline. Always good to have you here. So one of the things that takes place is okay, let me back up. I forgot to mention this. Luke is really, really, really obsessed with Leia. Like, the first time he sees her hologram, he's like goo goo gaga for her. And he just keeps commenting on how beautiful she is. And for me, it was a little cringe just because I know what's coming with them kissing and with them being brother and sister. So it's like they were really trying to have his infatuation with her be like a red herring for the fact that they're siblings, and to just add that kind of shock and awe. But he just keeps talking about that. And then even when Obi-Wan fixes the thing with R2, and he sees her more clearly, he's like, man, she's even more beautiful. And he's so obsessed with her. But then when it comes down to it, they find out what, prison block she's in the detention center. And Luke basically is like, hey, we should go rescue Leia, the princess. And Han's like, no way. Like, why would I do this? And Luke's reasoning is like, man, but she's so beautiful. Literally, he's like, dude, she's so beautiful. Why would we not rescue this beautiful woman? And Han's like, yeah, I really don't care. But then Luke is smart and is like, well, think about all the money you could get. She is a princess, and, there's tons of wealth and reward. And so you see the motivation of different people. One is motivated by love or just beauty, and the other is motivated by money. And so I think that helped with Han Solo as well. Just those little details that are, slightly different. Star Wars Tonight, what is up? Good to have you here. Thanks for being here, man. So what they do find out about Leia, and this was these 2 words about what was ahead for Leia if they didn't rescue her, like, did bring a lot more weight, I guess, to the movie for me. Hey, Matt Cave, Polda Spicoli, I'm late. No worries, man. No worries at all. So, basically, they find out that Leia is scheduled to have a slow termination. So a slow termination, and I'm thinking like, man, they obviously they don't give a name to it in the book, but that dark metal globe, that like torture globe, that comes in, like, okay, if that was just to like exact pain on her and extract information, like what would a slow termination be to Darth Vader? Because there is this whole scene that takes place where they're basically they're gonna blow up Alderaan, and she says they're on Dantooine, all this stuff, and Vader is like, okay, like, see, I told you, Tarkin, like, she will release the info, but then when they make that call, to blow up Alderaan instead, because they're like, Dantooine's too small of a target. No one will notice. They make sure they have these troops that like basically go and hold her right in front of a window and are making sure that she's watching her planet explode. So they're physically torturing her, they're mentally torturing her, and they're also like planning a slow termination for her. And I thought those little micro details throughout the book, while they aren't like changing the narrative, so to speak, they do just add a really respected like depth to what's going on. I like it. There is an awesome line when we get to the scene where Obi-Wan and Vader face off that I'm going to start using. He says, prepare to meet the Force. Vader with his lightsaber pulled out. Like, I just love that line. And like whenever maybe if I'm playing Battlefront 2 or something, I'm in a voice chat with somebody, I'll make sure to drop that line, when I'm on a roll, because I love, that's such a good one-liner. What is interesting, we know there's that funny quote by George, it's like poetry, it rhymes. He is a fan, and Alan Dean Foster is as well, of bringing these motifs that you see all throughout the book and the movies, and bringing them like full circle. So there's the scene where Obi-Wan, cuts the guy in half in the cantina, and when Vader and Obi-Wan are fighting, Vader uses the same move, and it describes him as cutting Kenobi in half, but basically he cuts him in half, and then like all of a sudden Kenobi's gone, and it's the two parts of his robe and his clothing that falls. And so that's where Vader's like, what just happened? And I just wonder if that was almost like the like you see with Obi and Anakin in episode 3, with the high ground move, where Anakin tries it a couple times and flips over him and, gets his limbs cut off. That's that same move that was used by Obi against Darth Maul. And so I wonder, while that wasn't like fleshed out and that wasn't a full thought then, I wonder if that cutting in half move was like a move that we were going to see a lot of with Obi-Wan, just because it was so brutal, and for Vader to do that same move, it was interesting just to even hear like my old master is here and I'm fighting my master. I liked that, and honestly I would like to see some live action people getting cut in half with lightsabers. I think that'd be cool. A few more things here, and because obviously we're getting near the end of the book, and I'll give my complete review of it, and I'll say like whether I recommend it or not, and a rating and all of that. When it comes to the strategy for the trench run, there is this dialogue that happens where people are questioning, like, why are we sending like small like one-man ships, basically. And this interaction takes place where it's like, well, the Empire is so proud that they're not going to expect the one-man ships. And so basically we're going to get the upper hand. And they're like, and they analyze the schematics, and they're like, there's a weak point that if we hit directly in the Death Star, the one-man ship approach will work. But it's obviously a very risky approach. But I liked that because it added a lot more strategy to the trench run for me. It helped make a little bit more sense of, why they wouldn't use larger battalions and things like that. Like why they would choose to go to small squadrons. I liked it. Matt Cave says, Obi-Wan's final lesson to his old apprentice showed Anakin how powerful he truly could have been. Ooh, yes. I like that a lot. And then, it just makes that even sweeter with Anakin, Vader, using the same move in the book that you see Obi-Wan use. It's pretty cool. This one is probably the most minute but interesting detail to me. Luke is Blue 5, not Red 5. So Luke is in Blue Squadron in the book, and he's not in Red 5. There's Yellow Squadron. There's not a Gold Squadron. There's green. There's blue. There's red. All of this, but I wish maybe there is an answer for it. But I wish I could talk with George Lucas. Well, I probably wouldn't waste my time with him asking him this question, to be honest. But I would like to know, like, why did you change him from Blue Squadron to Red Squadron? Yeah, that was a question where it's just like, if the script was already written and the novelization was already done, like, why feel the need to change such a minor detail that affects nothing, really? Obviously, you still have, like, all these people dying. The squadrons are a little more mixed up. It's not the same people in the same places and the same numbers. But that was pretty fascinating to me, just because, I wasn't sure exactly why that was taking place like that. But if anybody knows, let me know. Otherwise, we may just have it be a mystery, a George mystery. Who knows? Obviously, the Death Star explosion is described in beautiful detail. It's so cool. There's so much drama and fanfare and to read about. Basically, they describe the Death Star explosion as being brighter than any sun collapsing on itself. And it was this really cool, like, small detail that just made it seem like, man, like, that's just so awesome that, like, to think of the blazing brilliance of what it must have been like to see the Death Star explosion. That's cool. Ooh. McLean 1138, I just want to say thanks for you being here, because you've had a lot of really great info to add. This is awesome, man. Thank you. You're saying that was actually a technical issue with ILM. It was harder to make the effects seem believable with blue shifts at the time. Don't ask me the details because I don't know. So they changed them to red. Ah, good to know. So it was like once they actually started doing things, it was, I feel, now that you say that, I feel like I vaguely remember something about that in like one of the making of documentaries. I feel like I do remember that, actually. But yeah, Matt Cave says, probably due to the blue backdrops I used for the ship model captures. That would make sense. Okay. Well, that gets a pass for me. That makes a lot of sense. I was just like, is there some, where my mind was going? I was like, is this some deeper philosophical reason? Like maybe blue represents this and red represents this. And I was getting way too into this. And I was like, maybe there's like a video in this and all this, but nope, it's just technical reasons. Okay. This is so awesome in the end of the book. Chewie gets a medal. Yeah. Chewbacca gets his medal. And I know that there's people who've made tons of content about it and, all of this, and it's been explained. But I like reading that Luke, Han, and Chewie, they get their medals and they're celebrated in this old, basically this old celebration hall that hasn't been used in generations is now being used again. And it was just really cool. It was a cool moment because it all started with this kid who was just looking up into the sky, and he saw a space fight, and he went and talked to his friends like, there's something awesome going on outside. And his friend who is going into what he thought was the Empire saying, hey, I'm actually going to jump ship and go to the rebellion. And there's this excitement about the rebellion, all of this, and you see the evil of the Empire. You're introduced to Princess Leia, who connects them with the rebellion. All of this awesome stuff is happening, and you get to basically see like the satellite moon of Yavin and all of this, and the base that's on there, and all of this stuff is described, culminating in an explosion of the Death Star, and they're reusing this victory hall, this banquet hall, if you will, and to then have these heroes. You have the brute Wookiee, who's massive and his fist is as big as a frying pan, and then you have the smuggler who basically, once he got his reward for rescuing Princess Leia, was ready to take off. He's just like, hey, see you guys later. Like I don't want to fight something like this. There's no reward for me. It just sounds like a suicide mission, like a death wish. And then you have Luke, this dreamer, who's just like totally in over his head, but he's learning to trust the Force. And all of them brought together as like this misfit group of people. Like, to have that be the end, it's so cool. And honestly, when it comes to kind of the final portion of covering this, I have a few questions I was going to ask myself. Like, one, would I recommend people read this? And I would say absolutely. If you have not read this, I would highly recommend you get this. I got this for so cheap on eBay. Like, it's not even funny. I know, like, Timeline here was saying that he wants like a first edition. Like, that would be super cool. And there are editions that are a lot more expensive, but you can get one of these for dirt cheap if you want to read it. And what's great is pretty much every printing is the same. They kept a lot of the things, they in the movie, they changed quite a bit from the original script treatment, but all of the printings of the book are the same. Like, this one says that it's a special edition, but it's not. Like, the special edition scenes are not in this. And I was a little worried, honestly, because I was like, well, yeah, that scene with Jabba is cool, I guess. I'm not the biggest fan of it, to be honest. I mean, yeah, you see Boba, but anyway, it's not about special edition. And so I was a little worried, but yeah, it's not in there. And so that's cool. And thanks. And the cover of your edition is actually great. Yeah, I like it. It's pretty neat. It's cool. It's different. I wish I had the one with the Ralph McQuarrie art, but this one's cool. Also, if you're more of like an auditory person, I'm not going to link to them, but there are like radio dramas and stuff of the novel that you can listen to, just because, yeah, it's great to listen to. They incorporate music and all of this. Matt Cave, I would love to see the novelizations animated. I would totally watch that as either movies or even as a series. Yeah, that would be cool, because I know, especially once we get away from this, once you get into Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and the prequels and all of that, from what I've read about them and what I've heard about them, is that they are excellent. And there's a lot extra, especially Revenge of the Sith, if that's your thing. If you like the prequels, especially that one. That would be really cool. who knows? Maybe we'll get a fan edit. Like maybe someone could work on that. That'd be pretty cool. So what I plan on doing eventually is I'm going to start building a list ranking all of these books against each other, kind of like making like my like top tier list, if you will, and kind of putting things in place. For this book, honestly, I'm going to give this like a 7 out of 10. I will say, to be honest, this right here, The Heart of the Jedi, was a little easier for me to read. It kept my attention a little more. I was turning the pages, and like I wanted to get back to it all the time. There were parts in this that were a little harder to get through, and I think that's because I've seen the movie so many times, and it wasn't adding a tremendous amount of new information. Now, don't misconstrue that. I still really, really enjoyed it, and I think it's a book that honestly everybody who loves Star Wars should read, or at least carve out like 3 hours and on YouTube, put on the audio version, listen to it, and just enjoy that, because it's actually a really solid book. But for me, just a straight 7 out of 10. I really did enjoy this. And so what I'm actually going to do with that, I'm planning on doing these streams at minimum once a month, because I have a 10-month-old son right now, and so reading books is a little difficult. It kind of is. And so I've got to like find some time to listen, or not to listen, to read, or make some time to listen to like audiobooks and stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over like Thrawn series, Darth Bane, Splinter of a Mind's Eye, all the novelizations, the Jedi Academy trilogy. I have all this stuff that I bought recently, and I had to put a pause on because there's good stuff I'm going to go over. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to be posting in our Discord, basically my updates on the EU and updates on what's upcoming. So if you want to stay connected on my EU journey, I would encourage you, join the Discord, talk to me, especially if you've read a bunch of stuff and you have recommendations. Hit me up in the Discord. The link is in the description. If you like this kind of stuff, go ahead, subscribe. We try and release a video every other day about Star Wars. But you know what? With that, I have nothing else to say about this book. I appreciate all of you hanging out with me for about an hour talking about this. If you don't know, my name is Chase. I am Mr. Two Star Wars Nerds. There's myself and my wife who run this channel, and we just love Star Wars. So with that, may the Force be with you